everyone. We'll get started. We still might have a few people join us. Welcome to today's session on professional identity in social work. We will be recording today's session, except for later on when we go into small groups. So we do ask that everyone leaves their camera on. And I'm sharing the PowerPoint slides. There we go. So before we start this session, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands we are meeting on today. I'm on Wathaurong country and I acknowledge their strong connections to the land, seas and community. And I pay my respects to elders past and present, notion that the land was never ceded. And I extend that respect to all First Nations colleagues and to the First Nations children and families that we work with. So welcome to the session today. Please, everyone, have your pen and paper ready today for a creative session. I will introduce the team for today. I'm Alison, I'm the Supervision Coordinator from the Switch to Social Work team. We have Roslyn, our Concierge Support and Project Officer, and we have Charlie, our Communications and Engagement Reporting Lead with us today. And we also have the great pleasure today of being joined by Dr. Natasha Long from La Trobe University to facilitate a session on professional identity in social work. So I will hand over now to Natasha. Thanks, Natasha.
Hi everyone, and thanks for having me along today. I'm just going to share my slides now, and as we always do, we hope it works. I'm going to assume that works unless someone else tells me anything differently. So as Alison said, I'm going to spend some time with you today talking about social work professional identity. And I know, well, there may be some people in the session today who are not social workers. So when I'm talking about social work professional identity, think about your own discipline or professional background because the same principles really do apply. Okay. So I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm on today. So I'm in Bendigo on Dja Dja Wurrung country, and I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past and present. This picture here is a picture of the Bendigo campus of La Trobe University, which is where I'm working at the moment. I have been for many years. And I like to put this picture up because it reminds me of, one, the beautiful country that we're on here in Bendigo, but also about a time where I was having a really super busy day, like we all do, regardless of which kind of practice, field of practice we're in. I was having a really busy day, and I'd walked over from this building to the student union or the cafeteria to grab a coffee, and I was racing back, and I had this moment where something just made me stop and look up, and I thought, to myself, oh, isn't this a beautiful day? And then I went to race on again, and I went, hang on a minute, there's a reason that I have been kind of, called to stop here. And I just took the moment to ground myself and to really take in what was happening in the environment around me, and then captured it in a photograph. And it was a really important reminder to me of being taking those moments to notice what's happening and to being present and connected. So just wanted to share that with you, and also to show you my beautiful campus where we are. So what are we going to do today? So I'm going to do a little bit of a kind of talk around what we mean by professional identity and professional identity resilience. And then we're going to get into doing an activity around exploring social work professional identity using the metaphor of the social work hat. And I'm going to talk a bit about how that came about. And you may already be thinking yourself, oh, yes, I kind of resonate with this idea of a social work hat. And I'm going to talk with you about how the idea came about and how we can use that in practice to explore professional identity. And we're going to give it a go as well. And then we'll have a little bit of a reflection at the end. But first of all, I just want to tell you a bit about me so that you kind of get a sense of where I come from and how I'm kind of in this space at the moment. So I've been a social worker for just over 30 years. My practice background is as a social worker, originally at the Department of Social Security. For those of you who are of my generation, you will remember that, but we now know it as Centrelink. And also as a social worker in the school family support role in what was Centre Care at the time, now Catholic Care. Since 2004, I've been a social work academic at La Trobe University in Bendigo. I'm a senior lecturer and I teach across all of our year levels and in quite a few different subjects, including some of the practice subjects. And I'm also the social work field placement coordinator for the La Trobe Rural Health School. And I want to tell you a little bit about my graduation. It probably seems a bit random given it was 30 years ago, but it kind of gives you a sense of why I'm interested in professional identity for social workers. So embarrassingly, I have this photo of me rocking the 90s hairdo at my graduation in about, I think it was in 1993 when the graduation ceremony was. And I remember it really distinctly, even though it was so long ago. It was at Dallas Brooks Hall, for those of you in Melbourne who remember that, that big kind of, I guess, conference facility there. And when I turned up to graduation, I'd been working for a while as a social worker at Department of Social Security. So when people were saying, oh, what are you up to? And I'd say, I'm a social worker at the Department of Social Security. I did get some raised eyebrows because I actually did my degree at Phillip Institute of Technology, which is now part of, or was kind of, I guess, amalgamated with RMIT. But at the time, it was known because it was a radical feminist structural social work course. So to be working at Department of Social Security didn't really fit a lot of the graduates' kind of perceptions of where you might work as a social worker, having that background. But so I got some raised eyebrows because of that. But what I found really curious was when I asked people what they were doing, they would say things like, in those days, I'm a foster care worker, I'm a drug and alcohol worker, I'm a housing worker, I'm a, it wasn't actually called child protection worker, but the equivalent of a child protection worker. And I found it really curious because I'd come from a relatively small regional town. Big deal for me to move to Melbourne to do my degree. It was the only place I could do it. And I was really invested in being a social worker. So I found it really interesting that people weren't actually identifying themselves as social workers. And it just kind of sat with me over the years. And as I started to kind of move more into academia and talk with students about their experiences on placement and then as graduates in the field, that curiosity grew around trying to work out why some people identified really obviously with their social work identities, and for others they weren't so clear about that. So that kind of led me to do a PhD quite a few years ago now that focused on the experience of professional identity development for graduates. And it's also led to some more recent work around perceptions of social work in Australia, which I'm doing as a collaborative kind of project with academics in South Africa, New Zealand, and the Netherlands. So it's kind of been a bit of an interest of mine since then. And the work that I'm going to talk about today has come from that PhD study and then some additional work since then. So in terms of what is professional identity, there's different ways to think about professional identity, and it is based on people's worldviews, and obviously there's different worldviews. My own worldview is that of a social constructivist position, and what that means is that, for me, I believe that we make or construct meaning from the world in our interactions within the world. So this also shapes how I understand professional identity development, and that is that our professional identity is socially constructed and reconstructed because we're always having these interactions as we interact with the world around us. And because of that, it is context dependent and it's ever changing. So what that means is that my understanding of who I am as a social worker and my professional identity might look slightly different to yours because we're actually having different experiences, taking meaning differently from the interactions that we have in the world, and the context that we're practicing social work in will be different. So we actually have a unique social work professional identity, even though we might have some connecting values from our professional kind of identity and association. So the things that might kind of bring us together from a values base in terms of social workers might be the same, but the way we actually understand our own professional identity will be unique. So for the purposes of this workshop today, professional identity refers to how people understand themselves in professional roles and how others see this professional self. Okay. And then the other concept that came from my research was this idea around professional identity resilience. And I want to talk a little bit about that because I think in terms of how we experience the world as social workers, professional identity resilience is really important to understand and understand how that can actually support us. So professional identity resilience is about our ability to bounce back when we're faced with challenges to our social work professional identity. And I'm going to talk a bit more about what that might look like in a minute. So that means that when we come across issues that challenge who we are as a social worker, professional identity resilience is about how we adjust or adapt to that challenge. And sometimes we can also get to a point where we might confront and want to change that particular challenge or the circumstances that led to that challenge. So this idea extends the current literature that really focuses on the idea of a resilient practitioner or a resilient professional, and focus specifically on, excuse me, professional identity and ways to overcome challenges to that. Okay, so it's a little bit different. It's focusing right in on what are the challenges to our professional identity, and then how do we maintain resilience in that kind of context. So professional identity resilience is important in developing and sustaining a social work self, particularly during peak periods of challenges to social work identity. So I've just got a little example here that is a bit of an excerpt from the research, and I'm just going to see if I can move you, which I can. So just moving the pane from the side. So this is straight out of my PhD. It's a bit of a story about Anna when she found herself in one of these situations where she was challenged by people's perceptions of her social work identity. So Anna found herself at odds with her organisation's policy that did not allow her to refer to herself as a social worker. Anna challenged this with her supervisor and agency and was given permission to end emails and letters with social worker in the family services team. Anna found this experience frustrating and was concerned that she was being seen as pedantic by challenging what she saw as her right to use her professional title. However, this experience strengthened her social work professional identity. And she said, I've worked hard to get that qualification and I'm proud of being the social worker. And as a family support worker, I could actually be any other discipline and I want to be distinguishable as a social worker. And it's again about that identity. So for Anna, it was really important for her. She finished her degree with a really strong sense of what it meant for her to be a social worker. And she really wanted to be able to be seen as a social worker in the field. So she actually did go through quite a process in order for that to be able to happen. So these challenges, like the one Anna experienced, I've referred to as professional identity resilience building moments. And they're pivotal moments in developing professional identity resilience. However, what came through the research was also that there's some protective factors that help navigate these moments as well. So some of the protective factors, I'm just trying to move you all again. If I'm looking a bit, there we go, move you again over there. So some of the protective factors that help people with their development of professional identity resilience include having a clear understanding of what social work is to them. As I mentioned earlier, our understanding of our social work identity is unique. So it's about what social work means to individuals. That's important. Being supported by good supervision is also a protective factor. What was interesting around that point, in particularly my PhD, was that the supervision didn't necessarily need to be provided by a social worker for it to be considered good. It was actually more about the relationship that people had with their supervisors and where they felt they could be vulnerable and open and honest in terms of what they were experiencing about their challenges to their professional identity. Another protective factor was being able to socialise with other social workers. That kind of makes sense, doesn't it? If you're trying to build up your sense of being a social worker, being around other social workers is important. Social work values aligning with the organisational values is important. Being proud to be a social worker was also important. Having confidence in social work skills and knowledge, and being able to recognise when the fit with their agency was not right for them was another important protective factor. And that kind of might sound a little bit odd, but in some situations, in the absence of those other things above that happening, the fit for the agency may not be right. And in order to maintain a strong sense of social professional identity, the decision might be to leave that organisation. So you might be thinking, as I've been talking about all of this, but why is it even important? Why do we need to worry about professional identity resilience? Okay. But we do know that social workers at all stages of their careers face many challenges to their social work identity. They face pressures in the human service sector in relation to practice and expectations dominated by neoliberal ideologies. Social workers are also navigating challenges around professional status, sometimes stigma, sometimes that can be within the organisation, it can be from the community, it can also be from what we're reading in the media. There's also challenges around role clarity, professional and organisational values misalignment, and the absence of other social workers that can impact on their professional identity. I've got a link here, and I think Alison's going to pop it in the chat as well, to an article that has recently been published that I did with the research group I was talking about before, that is from South Africa, Netherlands, and New Zealand, that actually looks at what social workers in Australia understand about themselves as social workers as a profession. So it's worth, if you have time, it's worth a read. It won't take you very long to read it, but it does talk to some of the points about social workers often feeling misunderstood within their professional context because of some of the issues around role clarity, because of feeling that there's stigma associated with it. It's not a completely depressing article. Don't worry about that. There is some ways to think about how things can be done differently in that article as well. But it does speak to some of those points there. So professional identity is important for professional resilience, and there's been quite a lot of work done around that, so that if people have a strong sense of who they are as a social worker, it helps to mitigate some of those other compounding issues around challenges to maintaining professional resilience, right? So it helps with, with not experiencing burnout. It helps with being able to think through some of the challenges that come in practice if you've got a strong professional identity. And so it's important that graduates enter the field with a strong social work professional identity, and more importantly, that they find ways to sustain it. And that's where professional identity resilience is helpful. In addition, within this challenging context, social workers often experience knocks to their social and professional identity that can leave them feeling uncertain about the profession. And social workers need the skills to be able to positively navigate these. So that's, again, where professional identity resilience can assist. I do want to just note that I'm talking about professional identity resilience. That was the way that it kind of developed through the PhD that I did. But I don't want people to think that because I'm using the word resilience, that it's an individual responsibility to make sure that you have professional identity resilience. That's not what this is about. It's actually a collective responsibility that we, as educators, support students to develop the skills that can help them with professional identity resilience, and then as supervisors, that we're actually nurturing our graduates, but also for ourselves as those who have been in the field, for longer time, that we're actually also finding ways to maintain our professional identity as well. I'm going to pause before I race on and just see if anyone has got a burning question around any of that. I'm going to take silence as permission to keep going on. Hopefully it's making some sense. All right, so you notice that the first protective factor I had on that list was having a clear understanding of what social work is to them. And in terms of that, it kind of brings me to this activity around social work professional identity and the social work hat, because it's a way to actually explore professional identity so that people are kind of developing a way to talk about it, and also that they're actually developing their own sense of who they are as a social worker. What we know from my research, but also from other research, is that it's actually pretty difficult for social workers to explain what social work professional identity is. And that can be because of the uniqueness. I know people who have been in the field as long as I have been that do find it difficult to talk about their social work professional identity in ways that other people can understand. And so for new graduates, that's actually even more challenging, to actually find the words to be able to talk with other people and explain what their social work identity is about. But we do know that developing a social work professional identity is important for longevity in the field, and important for, as I was saying before, for maintaining professional resilience in the field. So social work students and newly qualified social workers are most at risk of struggling with their identity development. But as more experienced social workers, we're not immune from that, okay? Because those moments that challenge us, so those moments that I was talking about before as professional, resilience building moments, they happen all the time. If we were, having a chat now about some of the challenges you're having in your work right at the minute, some of them would relate to, I would imagine, your experience of being a social worker in the context that you're in. And so we're not immune to having challenges and questions raised about who we are as social workers. And, it happens in the university context as well. You might be surprised to hear that, but, that feeling of professional status kind of plays out in university setting as well. So an example is that, I'm in the La Trobe Rural Health School, so I'm in a school that actually where we teach degrees across quite a lot of disciplines, and that sense of that hierarchical, professional hierarchical kind of sense plays out in that environment as well, where at times we may not feel like, as social work academics, we're given the same kind of status as our colleagues in other disciplines. So all of that and all of my research kind of led to this idea of the social work hat. I want to give you a little bit of a story about how that came about. I'm just going to keep an eye on time. So when I was doing the PhD research, and the very first interview that I did with a participant, I asked them how, how people know that they're a social worker. So they worked in a multidisciplinary team, and I said to them, how is it that when people kind of are working with you that they know that you're a social worker? And she said to me, well, it's obvious I'm wearing my social work hat. And we both had a little bit of a laugh about that, because I don't know if all of you have, but I've certainly been, heard the saying of wearing a social work hat quite a lot. Yep. And so at the end of the interview with her, I came back to this idea of the social work hat. And I actually said to her, I want to talk a bit more about the social work hat. And she said, I was wondering if you'd come back to that. And I said, if I could see that social work hat, what would be on it that would let me know you're the social worker in the room? And then she proceeded to give me this really lovely description of her hat, which was something like it would be a pointed kind of witch's hat, but it would be, it would look more like the hat that the good witch Glinda would wear. I think I got the name right there, from the Wizard of Oz. And it would have sparkles on it, and it would have a band, and in the band would be a magic wand, but the wand would be slightly broken. And I said to her, oh, okay, so tell me a bit about this magic wand and why it would be broken. And she said, well, there is a little bit of magic to social work, but we can't fix everything for everyone, and part of our role is to help them be able to do that. So we had this really lovely discussion about her social work identity and some of the things that were important to her about social work through this story of the social work hat. And I thought to myself, as doing my PhD, very first interview, well, that was really interesting, wasn't it? And then I didn't think too much more about it. And then the next interview that I did, the person I was speaking to at one point in the interview said, and my sister always says to me, can you just take that social work hat off? And I went, oh, okay, this is really interesting. And again, later in that interview, I said to them, can we go back to that social work hat if I could see it, and so on. And we had another conversation about that. The research methodology that I used was grounded theory. So that kind of let me go where the stories were going and the interviews were going. So I actually then built into the research process a conversation about the social work hat with every other participant. And then I actually interviewed participants twice, and they were able to then add to their social work hat in that second interview, which gave them and me a sense of how their social work identity developed over time. So as it's got there, from that, one of the major findings from the research was that using the metaphor of the social work hat helped people be able to explore their social work identity and to think about it in a very different and unique way. So metaphor in the conversation that we have about our social work hat can help us develop a nuanced yet complex understanding of our social work professional identity. The metaphor provides the creative idea, and the conversation we have provides the detail that gives the metaphor meaning in everyday life. It is the conversation part of this activity that actually proves to be, if you like, the way that we can pull apart and help ourselves have more meaning to what we mean by our social work hat. We also know that professional identities continue to evolve, and just like in the same way as the story about our social work hat, we can imagine it as something that we can revisit, we can adjust, and it can be refitted, right? So your social work identity isn't going to stay the same throughout your whole social work career. So it's a useful metaphor for thinking about how we can talk about social work identity changing. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an example about what it looks like. So this is Angela's hat from my PhD. So Angela said, I think it'd have a magnifying glass on it, so you can look closely at things. It would have lots of grey. I just think the world's just not black and white. Just remembering there's lots of grey. It would have a pair of rose-coloured glasses. I think it's important to have the ability to look at the world a bit like that, but also have the ability to take them off at times. A chance card from Monopoly. Everyone deserves a second chance. People can make changes. The joke book represents keeping a sense of humour and self-care. Angela's hat is comfortable and it is balanced. And you can see an interpretation of the hat here. I'd like to say that I drew that, but I didn't. I had an artist actually draw a representation of the hats through the PhD. So you can see that there visually. But I want to kind of tell you a bit more about this conversation and how we got to that. So here's an actual excerpt from the transcript. So you can see that Angela said, when I asked her about her hat, that I think it'd have a magnifying glass on it. And I think it would also, it's just come into my head, have a globe of the world. So then I said, the globe of the world. And yes, and what would the magnifying glass be about? Okay, so I'm just clarifying and I'm asking about the magnifying glass. And that's where she says, so you can look at things closely. And she's also then going on to say it would have lots of grey. And you can see as we're having this conversation back and forth that we're actually teasing apart what she actually means by some of these things. The rose-coloured glasses one I think is really interesting here, this idea that it's important to see the world through rose-coloured glasses, but of course you need to know when you need to take them off and that you can't actually have that lens over the top of it as well. And then, as we kind of work through it, we're actually co-constructing her understanding of her social work identity. I won't read through everything there, but it just gives you a bit of a sense of what that conversation looks like. So what I've done since finishing my PhD, which was a little while ago now, is I've actually introduced the social work as an activity, the social work hat metaphor as an activity in classes. So the two hand-drawn pictures on the screen there are from final year social work students, an activity that we do in their final integrative seminar when they're on placement, where they've been asked to do exactly the activity about imagining that we could see their social work hat. The picture in the middle is from a workshop that I did on World Social Work Day a few years ago. And I also did the workshop in a similar way last year as part of our field education briefing session. So some of you might have actually even done the activity last year as well. And the other two pictures are pictures that were representations of social work hats from the one that has the rabbit on it is from my PhD and a participant there. So that's a social work hat that's like an Alice in Wonderland kind of experience where, you know, you're never sure what you're going to experience and you need to be able to navigate uncertainty. It's a really kind of beautiful expression around that. And the other one over to the other side is actually, I had a participant actually very, you know, curiously say to me, after they had shared their social work hat, what would my social work hat look like? So on the spot, I had to kind of think about what would it actually look like? I hadn't actually done the thinking before that, which was a bit silly of me, really. So that's kind of a bit of a representation of my hat from now quite a few years ago that I think would look different, probably the same shape, but it might say different things on it now. So we're going to do it, but I'm going to pause again for a minute. Okay, I'm just going to stop sharing for 2 seconds. Everyone can take a big deep breath. And just let me know if you've got any questions about anything before we actually get into doing the activity. Is it all making sense? Yeah. Does that idea of, you know, sometimes experiencing knocks to your sense of who you are as a social worker make sense? Yeah, I can see some nods there. Yeah. We probably all have our own little stories about that, I imagine, whether that's been as new graduates or as that's been as more experienced people in the field. One of my kind of recollections is often where, you know, people would kind of roll their eyes and say, well, what does the social worker have to say about it? I don't know if people have experienced that kind of, you know, thing before, as if, you know, the social workers are going to come in and say something, we better give them a bit of a voice to this, but really not giving it weight in terms of what they're expecting that I might say. Or you know, kind of leaning into the idea about that what we might want to talk about is how we're all feeling about it. So I'm sure we've all been part of those kind of, you know, what in the workplace people are seeing as a bit of a joke, but actually what it does is actually puts down our profession around, you know, our ability to be able to work within uncomfortable feelings and spaces. All right, are you feeling creative? Maybe. Okay, all right, I'm going to just share again. And we're going to have a go at this activity. So the first part of it, there's 2 parts to this. One is about you thinking about your social work hat, and then there'll be an opportunity to share it and have that conversational part of it. So what I want you to do initially is just think for a few minutes. I'll just pop this slide up here. Just going to try and move that. You know, this bit just kind of brings together what we were talking about before. So it can be difficult to find the social worker in the room. Social workers often don't wear a uniform, may not have social worker on their name badge, and are often working in teams with professionals from other disciplines. All of this adds to the challenge of knowing who the social worker in the room is. So how will people know that you are a social worker? What does your professional identity look like? Many people are familiar with the saying that we often wear different hats. In this context, a hat is a metaphor for the different parts, roles, and identities we have. Thinking of your hat and the hat you wear as a social worker, of your social work hat, can be a helpful way to think about your social work professional identity, what it is that makes you a social worker. In this activity, we want you to think about your social work hat. What is it about your hat that lets others know you're a social worker? What type of hat is it? What colour? What shape? What is it made of? Does it have anything on it? what is it that makes it a social work hat? So first of all, what I'm going to get you to do is just imagine for a minute that you're wearing your social work hat. Okay? So imagine it's on there, probably starting to get a bit of a sense of what it feels like. And now what I want you to do is actually take some time. And how are we going for time? Yeah. So we'll go for about 10 minutes, I think. I want you just individually to draw, make, if you've got something handy, if you'd like to, or write about your social work hat, thinking about the elements that make it a hat. Okay, so what's on your hat? What does it look like? What colour might it be? So thinking about all of that, I want you to spend some time actually creating your social work hat, whether that's through picture, whether that's through words, or as I said, if you've got something handy and you'd like to have a go at actually making it, you're welcome to do that as well. Now, this is just an individual activity at the moment. We're going to give you about 10 minutes to do this, and then we'll come back together for the next part of it. So stay online while you're doing it, but if you want to, turn your cameras off while you're thinking about it, feel free to do that, and we can just turn them back on when we come back. Everybody clear about what I'm asking you to do? Yeah. Now, if you have done this activity with me before, and if some of you came to the briefing session last year, you might have, try and remember what your hat looked like last time, and try and kind of replicate that, but think about what else you would add to it. As I said, this isn't, professional identity is evolving, it's not static. So there's always an opportunity to think about what it looks like now. So 10 minutes, I'll stop talking for a bit.
Natasha, I just wondered if I could make a comment, because I've been thinking about, what we might be putting on our hats, and as supervisors, and, supporting our early practitioners, and whether it's a switch participant or whether it's another practitioner you might have supervision of. I think a lot of the time when we've been practicing for a while, we're the most challenged when our practitioner comes to us with a dilemma or a problem, and they can't align their own values with, say, a decision that's been made about a child or family that they're working with, or they're grappling to, really understand what approach they can use. And I think they're those moments that you mentioned, but as social workers, those moments where we really think about our own tools and our own values and our own frameworks, and then support our practitioners with what they might use or what might align with them. And I think that's where those conversations about being a social worker, those are the conversations that we have in our roles as supervisors.
Absolutely. And I'd love to see what that looks like on your hat, Alison. If you can
Yes.
represent it in some way. But yeah,
Yes. Yes.
and I will talk a little bit more towards the end about actually maybe we'll just see, because we'll keep moving, because the idea about this particular activity that we're doing, of course, is something that you could actually replicate in supervision with the people that you're supervising, whether that's students, whether that's staff, because it is something people can pick up and just work with as well. And sometimes that helps, Alison, with those conversations, to start from that kind of, well, let's have this conversation about professional identity in the space as well. But look, that's almost our 10 minutes up. If people want to turn their cameras back on, we're quite a small group. So if you can put your cameras on so that I know that you're back, if you feel okay, or just give me a thumbs up with the emoji. Thanks. Perfect. Okay. So hopefully that that for those of you who lean into creativity, that felt really comfortable. And for those of you who, sometimes you're not quite sure, hopefully it didn't kind of stretch you too much for a Tuesday morning. But it is, as I said, it is a very different way of trying to visualize and think about professional identity. Through those slides that I talked about, though, you'll remember I said that the metaphor part of it is one way to kind of help us think about professional identity. But the other bit that's really important is the conversation bit. So I'm just going to put these slides up again, because what we're going to do now is actually, Alison's going to pop you into breakout rooms. And what I want you to do is share the description of your hat with the person in the breakout room that you're with. And I do say this, but I've not yet had anyone do it. I think it's actually hearing that back what your social work hat is about is actually really helpful. So if you get permission from the other person in this activity, I would encourage you to record it on your phone so that you can then later go and think about what it was that you said about your social work hat and then how the conversation helped you actually expand it. Because the person who's listening has got a bit of a job, okay? So as the person who's listening, your job is to try and not draw out, but I'm trying to move this again. I can't see. Anyway, your job as the person listening to the description of the hat is to ask those curious questions. So when someone says, my hat has a magnifying glass on it, to actually use the skills that we have as social workers really to say, well, tell me a bit more about that magnifying glass. What does that actually represent in relation to your social work identity? Or, you know, what colour hat is it? What is it made out of? What does that mean if your hat's made out of straw? Is that light? Is it an identity that you wear quite easily? Or if someone's saying it's a really dark colour, what's that meaning about the way they're feeling about their professional identity at the time? So in this part of the activity, one of you is sharing the hat, your description of your hat, and the other person is asking these curious questions. And when you've done that for about, I'm just looking at time, maybe for about 7 minutes or so, then you reverse the roles, okay? So then the other person shares their hat and the person becomes the curious questioner about that, okay? So hopefully that makes sense. So the idea is you'll be in pairs, you'll get a chance to talk about your hat, but I want that conversation to unfold. I really want you to lean into those skills that you have as social workers and ask some great curious questions about that, and then you reverse the roles. And I reckon we'll go in total for about maybe about 15 minutes, which will take us to just past 11 o'clock. I think that'll work for time, Alison. Do you think that'll work okay for time? Yeah, okay.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yep,
Is
that sounds good.
everyone clear on what you're going to do? Yeah? Okay.
Okay, I'll assign everyone to their rooms now.
Oh, I need.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're back. Hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that and enjoyed the conversations around it. I've got a couple of questions just to kind of go through as kind of bringing this back together, and then hopefully we'll have a bit of an opportunity to share some of your hats as well. So I'll just share the screens again. Share the screen. I think everyone will have that. So I'm curious to know what the experience was like for you. And I'm just going to put all these up, okay, so that we can have a little look at them for a minute, and then I'm going to unshare and we'll have a bit of a chat about it. All right, I'll remind you of what they are, so don't panic. But what was the experience like? Does anyone feel brave enough on a Tuesday morning to kind of unmute and let us know what it was like for you? Or feeling a little bit
I'll
shy?
go. It's okay.
Thank
I'm
you.
happy
Thanks.
to speak. I'll do it. It'll be very quick, but I'll speak.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, no, it was good. I've never actually thought about that question before. So it was good to think about it differently. And Andrea was lovely to talk to and get to know her a bit. So yeah, no, I think it was good to think about it and the different roles you play. I said to Andrea, I'm not going to lie, I did Google initially to think about some roles.
That's okay. Leaning into
it. Yeah. But yeah, no, it was actually different for me. I hadn't thought about it.
Great. Thank you. Anybody else like to share?
Yeah, I'll go. I was expecting to struggle with it because I'm not social worker trained, but I work in an environment where most of the people around me are social workers. And so then I just really thought about within the work I do, which I'm working within a social work framework really, how would that be different from how I would interact if somebody, a friend or a family member is telling me something, as opposed to how I would do it in a professional context? And that kind of helped me think about what it is that I do and how I operate in that space. That's sort of, yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. And that's a good example of where it's kind of useful. You know, I talk about social work hat identity, but it's useful in terms of thinking about identity, full stop. Thanks for that. Were there any things that got in the way for you? So were there any roadblocks or barriers that made it a bit challenging to think about your social work identity or your identity in this way? Has anyone got any thoughts about what the most useful part of the process was? Was it drawing your hat? Was it the conversation? Was it somebody else's perspective around that?
I think there was a for us, for Lynn and I, there was a we could and only take the sort of metaphor so far. So yeah, there might have been other metaphors that we could have used, but that would have also really confused your presentation. So that we understand that it was useful, but for us it was a little bit of a barrier.
Yeah.
We also possibly went on a slight tangent of talking about not so much what the hat looked like, but how you use the hat, and how the hat, you know, how this concept of a social work hat is something that you take off. So it's a boundary marker.
Right. Yeah.
Possibly in your day. So at the end of the day, you take your social work hat off and you're somehow different, and then putting it on, you put on that professional persona. So
yeah,
we sort of took the metaphor in that direction, a bit away from what it actually looked like.
So a little bit of self-care, maybe, Peter, there, in terms of being able to take it off at times and put it back on, could look almost a self-care thing.
As I said, as a boundary marker in the day or in the I don't know. Yeah.
Terrific. My colleague in New Zealand that I do the work around perceptions of social work with, they talk about, she's had students talk about a cloak, that there's this cloak that is about their social work identity. So I think the metaphor actually is, you know, I use the hat metaphor, but of course there's other metaphors that would help with that conversation as well. Yeah, fantastic. I'm hoping that you all learned something new about yourself as social workers, or the identity that you have at work, your professional identity. I mean, that's the purpose of the activity, is to find ways to help people talk about it, but also that we're continually learning about our social work identity ourselves. In terms of as supervisors, it is a really helpful way to start those conversations and have those conversations with people that you're supervising, whether it is students or it's, you know, staff members that you're supervising. So, you know, feel free to have a play around with the idea. And if you think it's going to work with the way that you do supervision, to kind of bring that up with your students. I know the students at the La Trobe Rural Health School in the Switch to Social Work program, they actually are quite familiar with this idea of the social work hat, because we did the activity last year. Those on the Bundoora campus, they won't necessarily have done it yet, but they will do it as part of you know, their placement integrative seminars that we do with them. So, but it doesn't matter if they've done it with you, right? It's something that you can continually do, because things do change. Does anybody feel, well, actually, Alison, I'm going to hand over to you, because I want to kind of, maybe if people feel comfortable, I'm going to ask people to share their hats. But I've already roped Alison into it. So I might hand over to Alison to share her hat, and then if anybody else would like to, we'll do that too.
Thanks, Natasha. So I will hold up my hat and show you all. You know, please don't be too critical of my drawing skills, but I'll hold it up. So can everyone see it, and then I'll explain it.
Just got to go back just a little bit, I think, with it.
How's that?
Go back a bit more and up a bit higher. Perfect. Yeah.
Okay, so it's very simple. I haven't put a lot of detail on the hat. I'll take it down and I'll explain it. So the big teddy bear in the center is just a reminder for me that, you know, usually the work that I've done and that I do with my new practitioners, it's child-centered work, and it's a reminder of a child's thoughts and feelings and experience in whatever the work it is that we're doing. And as a reminder to practitioners that we're supporting early in their careers too, to sort of think about, you know, who is their client and whose interests or rights are they trying to represent, to try and reconcile some of those challenges that come up in the work that we do with families. The house was just as a reminder and a prompt to think, you know, all children, all families have a right to, you know, have safety, have a safe home, have stability, and have their needs met. And then the two people thinking and talking together were really, I was drawing them thinking they were going to be like children in a family, but it also represents, as practitioners, supervisors in this space, the conversations that we have and the relationships that we build with our early practitioners in, you know, supporting them through their development and their learning, and that's where the learning, you know, happens. It's in the conversation, it's in the reflection, it's in the language, and particularly around, as social workers, what are our values, what are our professional values, personal values, and, you know, how do they balance out, or where they don't align at all, how do we reconcile that together?
Thank you, Alison, for doing that. Is there anybody else who would like to share their hat? And there's no judgments here on creative skill, so.
I'm happy to talk to mine. I didn't draw it. I had some symbolism and then explanations for it, so I'm happy to share that.
Perfect. Thanks, Andrea.
So I had some question marks, which is really about the critical reflection that we engage in the work that we do, and really kind of look at what's underneath, you know, some of the behaviour that we're seeing or the comments that we're hearing. I had some rolling deserts with flowers in it, representing, you know, resilience, hope, and growth. Embracing hands, you know, representing partnering with people. And I had a card with a butterfly on it, because I think butterflies represent growth, and I think everybody's, you know, capable of growth, but it's about, you know, being ready to pick up that card and embrace.
Thank you for that, Andrea. I think you've just frozen a little bit there, but I think we've got a good understanding there.
Everyone's choice about whether they're ready.
Perfect. Thank you. That's great. I love the visual of all of that, and I can actually see it unfolding as you're talking. So thank you very much for sharing that.
No worries.
I might keep moving, but, you know, hang on to the pictures and the descriptions of your hat, and keep them close by, because there might be something that you go away and think about a little bit more afterwards as well. I'm just going to put these slides up really quickly again. Okay, we're not going to do this activity, but what I would encourage you to think about as we finish off today is what you learnt about your social work identity through the activity today, and how you might incorporate that into your social work practice. So for yourself, as social workers, when you're having peer supervision, when you're talking with colleagues, where you're having supervision, how might you use the social work hat to help you kind of maintain your sense of who you are as a social worker? But also, how might you use it with people that you're supervising? And as I said, feel free to, you know, run with the idea and kind of make from it what you would like in terms of how it might work. And I'm just going to finish with this little reflection. So the thing about hats and our social work hats is that sometimes they might fall or get bumped off. Here's my little, if it works. And perhaps get caught in the wind, or we might even put them in a cupboard because we're unsure if they really fit. But with some help, we can dust them off, pick them back up and pop them back on. And those moments when our social work hats fit just right and we are proudly wearing our social work hats, well, they feel pretty amazing. So I encourage you all to make your social work hats, your professional identity, visible. Seek support if you're feeling unsure, and to most importantly, wear your social work hats proudly. All right, and I'm going to stop sharing on that note and just see if there's any comments or questions, and then I'll hand back to Alison. Back over to you, I think, Alison.
Thank you. Thanks so much, and to everyone for participating today. I think that little cartoon at the end there really does, just visualize that idea of resilience, and how if we get knocked down or if a hat gets knocked up, just that, that action of picking yourself up, dusting it off, putting it back on, and keeping our social work identity visible, and helping our early practitioners at the stages they're at right now in shaping and thinking about their own social work hats. So I think we've still got a few minutes left, but I'll take the opportunity to say a very heartfelt thank you to Natasha for presenting today on a topic that I know does come up quite a bit in some of the conversations that I've certainly had with some of you in the room today, thinking about how to support and really guide our early practitioners now towards the final stretch of their journey into social work. So thank you, Natasha, really thought-provoking and a really fun activity to do today. I will share my screen one more time. If everyone could just please take a moment to scan this QR code. I do have a link to the form as well that I can put in the chat, or Charlie might do that for me, if you can, Charlie. And yeah, we'd really appreciate everyone just taking a moment to fill out the very short evaluation form. Really appreciate your feedback to do that, so thank you. We will send around some slides from today's session and the recording, so that can be shared with any colleagues who couldn't attend today, and we'll also send you certificates of attendance just to use for professional development if you need those. And there's the link to the evaluation form in the chat. Thanks, Charlie. Does anyone have any comments or anything else I would like to share before we finish the session? No? Okay, well, we can give you a few minutes back in your day. Really appreciate your time attending today, and we'll see you at some more events coming up this year for Switch to Social Work.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.